The chamber was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't just fill the air, but seems to tighten around your chest like a vice. Overhead, the antique brass chandeliers flickered softly, casting long shadows against the marbled floor of the United States Senate. And at the center of it all stood Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, shoulders squared, eyes sharp as cut glass, and his voice about to slice through the silence like a razor through silk. He hadn't come to play games that day, not after the months of whispers and accusations, the late-night cable segments, the think pieces, the smirks behind closed doors. No, Kennedy had come with something heavier, facts, cold, clean, and unyielding. And sitting across from him, flanked by a tangle of aides and a half-empty cup of black coffee, was Congressman Adam Schiff, arms crossed, jaw tight, doing everything in his power not to blink first. Let's rewind, though, because to understand the weight of what happened in that chamber, to truly feel it, you have to know the men behind the names. John Neely Kennedy wasn't just a senator. He was an old-school Southern storyteller with a law degree from Oxford and the sharp wit of a man who'd learned to read people long before he ever read legal briefs. His roots ran deep into the red clay of Louisiana, where he'd grown up working, class, listening more than speaking, and watching the slow grind of politics from the kitchen radio. Kennedy had spent a lifetime mastering the art of folksy charm, but beneath the homespun, metaphors, and self-deprecating jokes was a mind like a bear trap. His greatest fear, being dismissed as a caricature, just another colorful conservative from the South, and his dream to bring accountability back to a government he believed had traded truth for theatrics. Adam Schiff, on the other hand, was the golden boy of California progressivism, sharp-suited, calculated, cerebral. A former prosecutor with a reputation for precision and a penchant for marathon committee speeches. Schiff had built his career as a guardian of institutional norms, someone who saw himself as a bulwark against political chaos. He believed deeply in process, in law, in structure, but that belief had hardened over time into something brittle. He feared irrelevance more than failure, and behind his calm demeanor was a man haunted by the idea that no matter how many facts he laid out, they'd be drowned out by noise. So, when the Senate Oversight Committee convened that morning for what was supposed to be a procedural hearing on federal transparency laws, no one expected fireworks. But Kennedy had been quietly preparing. The turning point came midway through Schiff's testimony. He'd just finished a 30-minute presentation filled with graphs, charts, and citations, speaking in that clipped, neutral tone he'd perfected over 2 decades. He was explaining why certain federal communications should remain classified longer. To protect national integrity, he said. Kennedy, tapping a pen slowly against his notepad, waited, then stood. Mr. Chairman, he drawled, I'd like to ask my colleague from California a few questions, not about the law, but about the truth. There was a subtle shift in the room. Senators sat up straighter. Aides stopped typing. Schiff leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. What exactly, Kennedy continued, are we protectin' when we keep the American people in the dark? Are we protectin' them or protectin' ourselves? And just like that, the tempo changed. Kennedy began laying out a timeline, a meticulous, undeniable string of communications between Schiff's office and intelligence contractors that suggested certain redactions in public documents had less to do with security and more to do with political shielding. The documents were legally obtained, Kennedy assured, through FOIA requests and whistleblower tips. Every time Schiff pushed back, Kennedy responded not with insult or anger, but with one more piece of evidence. One more quote, one more fact. Schiff's frustration began to show not in words, but in the way he pressed his fingers together, or how his eyes flickered toward the chairman's gavel, perhaps hoping for a rescue that wouldn't come. And then Kennedy leaned in, voice low and steady. "Congressman, you once said, and I quote, 'Transparency is the lifeblood of democracy.' So help me understand something. When did we decide some truths are too inconvenient for daylight?" The silence afterward was thunderous. Even Schiff didn't answer. Couldn't, maybe. That was the moment the story exploded across the airwaves. Clips went viral. Kennedy's drawl was suddenly a rallying cry, and Schiff's silence a haunting echo. But the truth was, both men walked out of that chamber changed. Kennedy wasn't gloating. In fact, he left without speaking to reporters, choosing instead to call his son back home and ask how school was going. He knew the spectacle wasn't the victory, it was the why behind it. For him, this was never personal. It was about a government that had gotten too comfortable in the dark. Schiff, for his part, retreated from the spotlight. For weeks, he turned down interviews, cancelled speaking engagements. But during that time, something cracked open in him, a realization that his obsession with control had cost him the very credibility he once wielded with ease. He began reaching across the aisle more, taking unexpected meetings, even quoting Kennedy once during a speech on congressional reform. And meanwhile, a subplot had quietly been unfolding. In the background of all this political theater was a young journalist named Maya Coulson. She had been covering government transparency issues for a small independent outlet, and while everyone else was chasing sound bites, she was chasing stories. She was the first to trace the origin of the FOIA documents Kennedy used, the first to interview the whistleblower, and the only one to link it all to a pattern of systemic obfuscation that had been happening for years. Her reporting exploded too, but not because it was flashy, because it was thorough, honest, and it mattered. That's how the other subplot was born, how Kennedy and Schiff, through vastly different paths, inspired a new movement in the press to dig deeper, and for citizens to start asking harder questions. The emotional climax didn't happen on the Senate floor. It happened 3 months later at a town hall in Baton Rouge where Kennedy was asked by a retired teacher, "Why did you go after him like that?" Kennedy paused. "I didn't go after him, ma'am," he said softly. "I went after a lie, and sometimes when the truth gets buried deep enough, you gotta dig a little harder, even if it means getting your hands dirty." The crowd fell quiet, then rose in applause, not because of who won or lost, but because for once someone said the quiet part out loud. The story ends not with a gavel, but with a seed. Schiff returned to Congress a little more humble, a little more human. Kennedy remained unpredictable, folksy, sharp, and Maya. She won a journalism award and used the prize money to fund a nonprofit that trains young reporters in investigative work. In the end, the lesson wasn't just about facts or power or politics. It was about truth, how fragile it can be, how fiercely it must be protected, and how sometimes the people we least expect are the ones willing to fight for it. And that, my friends, is what Senator John Kennedy really did that day. He didn't just humiliate Adam Schiff with facts. He reminded a nation how powerful facts can still be, even now, even here, even when no one believes anymore. Especially then.